It's not to be like the world, and not to be like the great majority of American Christians, but to be like Jesus Christ. I don't know why you're clapping. I'm talking about you.
What's wrong with you people? I'm serious.
You can't say amen, you ought to say ouch.
Hello, humblebees. Welcome to Tulips and Honey.
Hi, Humblebees. Welcome back to Tulips and Honey. You are listening to The Hub. That is a group of Reformed podcasters all here on Tulips and Honey Hub. This is the Tulips and Honey show, and I am your host, Lauren, and today I am joined by a dear sister, Erin Coates. Sister, thank you so much for joining me. This is going to be such an exciting topic.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, you are going to be discussing with us today two separate topics that are technically pretty similar, pretty close together. So we're going to be talking about women's ministry, which is something that you are deeply involved in. And we're also going to be talking about a conference that you're going to be speaking in. And so those are kind of similar because both of them are ministering to women. But before we get started really digging into all of the questions that I have, and there's so very many questions, I'm going to try to have some self-control, fruit of the spirit. I can do this. So before we get into all of those questions, though, can you give our listeners a run through of how it is exactly that you were saved by the grace of God?
Oh, wow. Sure. And I'm not, just want to kind of preface this. I'm not an expert in either women's ministry or the conference that I'm going to be in. I'm a little bit like, how did I get here? And I think my testimony leads into that a little bit because I'm just so amazed that God would save somebody like me. I grew up in a nominal Christian home, and I grew up in the church, went to church every Sunday, saying just generic prayers as a child. And I was a competitive gymnast for 8 years of my life. So I think I was about 3 when I started training, and then started competing when I was 7. So that was my love, and that was really my identity. And I was always in the gym. And when I wasn't in the gym, I was with the girls that I trained with, or we were watching gymnastics, and always kicking somebody in the face as a young child. I've spent the majority of my life on my hands, and I can still do some of it.
Wow,
and some of our
impressive.
ladies. Yeah, some of our ladies will joke and have me do flips sometimes. So sometimes I forget that I'm 40 this year because in my mind, I can still do it. And it's like, I've had 2 babies and I'm a little older. So I can't quite do what I used to be able to do. But yeah, that was really my love. But that really started to take a toll on my body getting into my teenage years. And as I hit high school, it was kind of this new world, new people. And the town that we lived in, it wasn't really small, but there was a lot of just drugs, alcohol, partying. And so when I quit gym, I really didn't know who I was. And it's so true as children and as teenagers, your life is really just a quest for identity. And that's why it's so important for us to be training our children with a biblical worldview and telling them that their identity is found in Christ, because I was so lost and just living for every pleasure of the world. And so I started to just hang out with the wrong crowd really early and started to just experiment with alcohol and some softer drugs. But as I got a little bit older, that turned into more harder drugs. And probably just a couple years of living that, party lifestyle on the weekend. And I decided after high school in my early 20s, I wanted to go to business college. And to put myself through business college, I started working in a nightclub. And that was just awful because the things that you're subjected to there, it's just a lot going on that you don't see when you're there partying. And so I was very naive to that world. And God thankfully kept me from a lot, but I still was subjected to a lot.
Right.
and I was a party girl. And so my drug of choice was ecstasy. So I did a lot of ecstasy. I was at the raves, and then trying to put myself through business school and working in the nightclub. And I ended up meeting this guy, and he was an affiliate with a gang. And
Whoa.
I ended up a few months later getting pregnant, and I had my first son. So I was a single mom. And that was terrifying to me,
Right.
because here's like, I have this Christian family, and here I have this outward expression of how I had been living my life for the last 10 years.
Right.
So I'm just, to make a long story short, I knew that I wanted to raise Isaac in the church. So I would kind of go back to the church that I left the church when I was 18, just because I said I saw hypocrisy, but I just really wanted a way out.
Right.
And as a teenager, I was living in and out of my parents' house because I would just leave. I would go and party and wouldn't come home. Right. And so after I had Isaac, I thought I really need to clean up my life to be a mother to this child. And I was living off of the money that I had made in the nightclub while I was pregnant, and a few months after that, and ran out of money and thought, I don't really want to work during the day. So I should probably go back to the nightclub. You think I learned my lesson, but I didn't. And I thought that I could keep out of trouble. And I started dating another guy, and really started to get sucked back into that life. And just for discretion purposes, I won't go into everything that I was involved in, but just fell into grievous sin, and fell into a sin I said I would never ever do. And that really broke me, because it was a standard in my life that I had held. As long as everyone was kind of praising me because I was a good mom, I was taking care of my son, I was working, and I was financially providing for him. So from the world standard, I thought I was a pretty good person. But just to break a law that I had created in my own heart, really crushed me and sent me into a really dark place. I don't think I ever thought about taking my own life. I just wanted to die, and the only thing that kept me going was this little boy, And I remember one time, he was a few months old, and I had gone back to church, and I had remembered them saying that they were going to see the Passion of the Christ. And I never thought anything of it. They were going to take a bus down, and I had heard them say that. And I was, so then back up to just before I was saved, just again in darkness, knowing that I needed to be forgiven for what I had done. And I had some kind of basic grasp of who God was. Like, I never denied him in the sense that I knew he was real. I knew creation was 6 literal days. Like, there was still things that I held on to that I had been taught when I was younger. So I knew that God was real. I just refused to submit my life to him. And so one night, I was living on my own with Isaac. And one night, my cable wasn't working. So I said, okay, well, let's go to the movie store and get a movie. Obviously, he was going to be sleeping. And so when I walked in, there was this huge display of the Passion of the Christ.
Wow.
And I know that people say that movie has issues and Catholic overtones and stuff like that. But I didn't know that, and I didn't see that. So I put him to bed, and I put the movie in, and from the first scene in the garden, I just wept my whole way through. And I remember seeing Christ on the cross and just thinking, man, that's what you did for me, and this is how I'm living my life. And I think I had some basic idea that even though like the movie was gruesome, that wasn't even half of what he was actually doing on the cross. And obviously that was just the Spirit. So I went upstairs, looked at Isaac, and thought, like, how can I take care of this little boy if I can't even take care of myself? And just went into my bedroom. I didn't know the word forgiveness. I didn't know the word repentance. But I just spent the whole night just weeping, asking the Lord to forgive me for my sin. And so I believe that was the moment I was saved. And so went back to church, stepped away from the nightclub life and started working in a sports bar, which I thought was a step up, where I told them, hey, you know what, if you put me on Sundays, I just won't be here because I'll be at church. So it was more like a restaurant kind of thing. They closed at a normal time. But just didn't have any real conviction, and no one really grabbed my life to disciple me.
Right.
So as I look back on it, I think there was still a willingness in my heart to compromise. I would have never, ever said that. I would have said, I love the Lord. But when I was pushed, I think I would have compromised. And actually that led me a couple months later, probably 4 months after I was saved, I fell into sin again. Ended up going out with a friend from high school, and we had some wings and beer, because that was kind of just what our youth leaders did at church. Like they would have youth group, and then they would go to the sports bar and get a pitcher of beer, and they could do that.
Yeah.
But I couldn't. And so that ended up a big party night. And then remember waking up Sunday morning, I had missed church. Monday, I'm sitting in my pastor's house, because he was my Bible study leader, going like, can they smell the alcohol on me? And just feeling so guilty.
Yeah.
And that was the moment for me where I was like, I can't believe that I did that after God saved me from this. I need to know, what does he require of me? And so that's really where I think the zeal for his word started, because I needed to know, what were his words? What did he want me to do? So that's when I started getting really serious about the Bible and reading it. And, thankfully back then, like Facebook wasn't a thing and YouTube wasn't a thing. And so, yeah, I would say that's really what started just my love of the word and the seriousness of holiness, where I remember just so vividly right after that Bible study, lying on my bed and reading Matthew, and him saying, like, if it causes you to stumble, cut it off.
Right.
And so I realized I had to drastically cut my life off, that if my friends wanted to come see me, it would have to be at the playground or at my parents' house. But that I wasn't going to meet them on their turf. It was time for me to cut that life off and take drastic measures. And that's what I did. And it took me a few years to be able to re-engage with my friends and be able to stand firm and not be tempted by their life. So that, in a nutshell, is my testimony. Just a really lost young woman, just gross immorality that I was engaged in. And so I'm a little bit baffled that the Lord would save somebody like me. And my husband's preaching through the woman at the well. And I'm like, man, I feel like her, just this divine appointment with an obscure woman that he is going to share, that he is the Christ with. And I just feel like, yeah. And then to put me into service is such a huge blessing and privilege. I mean, not everyone loves, the fact that I'm a pastor's wife and have the past that I have. No one in my church thinks that. But people are legitimately surprised at the kind of life that I lived before coming to Christ, because the change is so drastic. So
I would just like break down. Oh my goodness. Just because the grace of God in that is so clear and evident, that he would take wretches like us and give us so much that we don't deserve. But then on top of that, to even ever be able to use us for any sort of ministry is just, oh man, that's wonderful to hear. And I'm so thankful that you shared your testimony, because I know that there are people out there that were raised in Christian homes and they didn't have that experience. So they don't have the ability to really relate, and they'll probably say, wow, why, should she be doing this? And that's a bad past. But there are so many others that have that bad past, and God has graciously saved them, and they don't know how to be a servant in the church, because all they can think about is, well, it shouldn't be me because I have this bad past. And I know I struggled with so many of the different things that you just mentioned, that the right away after being saved, the idea of like, I don't even know what I'm supposed to be doing. Like, I don't know what God expects from me. And I was so earnestly excited to be in a spirit of thank, like complete thanksgiving to God for saving me that I mean, like, I immediately wanted to like just follow all the Old Testament laws. And I started telling my family, like, we can't use electricity on Sundays, right? Like, are we supposed to just not go shopping on the Sabbath? I mean, like, I was so confused at that point. But I had that same experience where God was just like gracious, patient, kind, loving, slowly working the things out of us. And it's amazing to me as we go along in our walk. And I'm sure you've had this experience where your original, the original sin that you were so horrified by, it's still horrifying. But as you get further and further in your walk with Christ, some of the sins that way back then you probably would have been like, that's not a big deal. Now if I fall into like, if I wake up late, this isn't really necessarily a sin, but if I miss my prayer time and my time with study, it's devastating, right? Like, so it's interesting to me how that sanctification starts, but then continues as we go along. So before we switch off, I was wondering one quick thing. When you had Isaac, that was right. That's his name, right? Isaac. Okay, good. Sure, I love that name. Was there a point while you were pregnant where you considered, because of your family, where you considered abortion? And what is it that was there that made you say, absolutely not, this is my kid and I'm going to have it?
Okay, wow, that's a really great question. No, the people around me were pressuring me to have an abortion, and I actually went and was, for the first time in my life, had prayed and just was so confused. And I was walking down the road, and this is my experience. I don't know from the outside what actually was happening. This is just what I saw. Okay. This woman walks up to me, and you have no idea that I'm pregnant. I'm not showing. I never showed until I was like 7 months. So literally she doesn't know. And I wasn't crying. I just was looking down. And then all of a sudden I looked up from a great deal distance away from the abortion clinic itself. And she looks at me and she says, "You're not going to do this. Get in your car and go home." And I was like, okay.
Wow.
And so she was so brave, because there was somebody that was with me and I want to be so careful about what I'm talking about. Sure. They were yelling at her, calling her names very aggressively. And she just walked me back to my car, opened the door, put me in, told me to roll down the window, and slid these verses through the window, right? So yeah, well, that actually leads me to this gives me a good segue to talk about what was the sin that I fell into. It was an abortion. I got pregnant again. And for me, that was the unforgivable sin. And it took me a really long time to get over that, because there was guilt and then there was grief with that. And I know that it's kind of the unspoken kind of sin within the church. And it's something you can't take back. Like, I look at my son, he's 17, and think, man, he loves the Lord. He is such a great young man, and the impact that he's making for the kingdom. And then here is something, I was completely blind. You know, I was culpable and guilty for what I did, but there really was a blindness. There was a blinder over my eyes. And I remember it happening. And as soon as I did it, I knew I had killed my baby. And so for 2 years, I lived just crying. Like, even after I had asked the Lord's forgiveness, I felt like that was a sin that he couldn't forgive me for, because in my heart, that was the unforgivable sin, even though it's not. And so I thought that there needed to be some penance on my behalf to earn his favor. And I remember my pastor saying from the stage one day, you know, you just need to forgive yourself. And so I'm in the car with my then boyfriend, now husband. And I turned to him, I said, I just can't forgive myself for this. And he looks at me and he says it so gently. And he's like, "Are you above God?" Oh. I thought, well, no. And he goes, Erin, nowhere in scripture are we commanded to forgive ourselves, but to embrace the forgiveness of Christ and that he paid for this sin for you. And that really released me from like bondage that I put myself in. And the enemy was just having a heyday with my thought life at that point, because I was so distraught, but just thought he couldn't forgive me for this. He could forgive me for everything else, but not this. And so then when I really started to embrace the gospel, and that Christ's forgiveness was so much more vast than I had given him credit for, and actually started to believe, no, he actually does forgive me for this sin. I thrived after that. I still mourn 16 years later. There's still that grief in my heart. And if I could, help any woman out there, don't do it. You can't take it back. I know I'm forgiven, but I wish I had never done that. I think I really needed to see, because I still thought I was a good person. I really needed to see what I was capable of. God needed to show me the darkness in my heart and what I was truly capable of. So yeah, just an encouragement to all of those. So I went to an abortion clinic that didn't have picketers around it. And I wonder if they were there, because they were there the first time.
Right.
So just an encouragement to those picketers, like, the effects of one woman hearing you, is like the effect of that is exponential, and I can't imagine this world without Isaac. And, but yeah, I still live with the grief and the pain of that. I still have moments where I will cry, and yeah.
Wow. I'm so glad I asked that question, because I started not to. And hopefully, because I have heard from women that will say that they've messaged me and they're like, I understand that there's forgiveness, but I've done this and I can't be forgiven from that. And so it does seem to be something that affects women for years on end, where they're still saying, yeah, but this. And so because this is too big, just like you said, and maybe hopefully if they're listening, they'll hear the words that your husband said to you that day, that you're not bigger than God. We have to embrace that forgiveness and anything else too. I mean, I know that there are also men who struggle with that they brought their girlfriends or whoever to the abortion mill and they caused that or were a part of that. So hopefully that will be helpful to anybody that's listening. And I'm going to get it together. And I mean, this is why everybody tells me, like, seriously, waterproof mascara and eyeliner. I'm like, no, I can't do the waterproof stuff, because then it will never come off my face. And it bothers me to have to sit there and scrub my eyes for hours. But I'm going to get it. We're going to get it. What a beautiful testimony of the grace of God, though. Thank you for sharing that and really being open to talking about that. I think one of the most disturbing things to me is to find the women that are soft on abortion because of that. So they'll say, well, I feel like I had this, I did this, so I just want to be maybe more positive towards women. And so they won't actually say, hey, don't do this. This is murder. You don't want to do this. But they want to come in after the fact and just sort of comfort the person. And they tend to be the ones that will actually be really aggressive towards anybody that is willing to go and pick it at the mills and try to pull women away. And so I'm really encouraged by the love that you have, because I mean, I don't want to call it courage. Like, I think that we would be confused if I said, hey, you're just so courageous to sit. I'm sure that this isn't a conversation that you ever want to have. And it's not about being courageous enough to have it, but that you love women enough to say it. And so I think that that's really important for us to recognize, that it takes love for one another to be able to really lay it all out like that. And I'm going to keep it together. I'm going to keep it together.
And a love for Christ and a love for, there's a reason why he says this is sin. It has massive consequences. So yeah, to protect, if your friend was going to shoot somebody, you would stop them from shooting that person, right? Because there's consequences for that. And I have a really brother that I love. I don't know if you've heard of Tony Miano.
Yes, absolutely.
He does just amazing ministry outside of the abortion clinics. And I just love that man. He loves those young women so much, and it takes a lot of courage to stand out there and to be called the names that he is. And it's really unfortunate, to allow somebody to do that. I have to wonder about that. It's a very serious sin. And I even knew that as an unbeliever. And then the darkness that threw me into. I do hope to one day write some really good biblical curriculum for it where, you're just laying out what is it, the consequences of it, just real good biblical. There's nothing, I haven't seen any good biblical content that is Christ exalting, gospel centered, is going to free these women to walk in holiness and to be free to serve, So I hope one day to get that's on my list of stuff that I want to do.
I'm going to be praying for you for that because I agree. I haven't seen anything other than sort of fluff stuff that's not really actually gospel centered, and that's really important. The point that you're making there about the forgiveness is important to be included in that alongside the seriousness of it all. And I tend to only see one or the other. And so I think that would be really helpful, especially coming from you, sister, where you've gone through it, but you also have a biblical sound theology. So I'm going to be praying for you for that. It's hard to get anything done whenever we're homeschooling, isn't it?
It's true.
I have a long list of things too that I'm like, one of these days I'll either no longer need sleep or I'll have extra time during the day. But I mean, eventually they'll hopefully invent something that makes it to where we don't have to sleep. Hopefully, that's my hope. We need something like that so that I can.
Lauren, with that, it took me a really long time I think it was only recently that I even shared it with my friends because there's still a shame. So there was still a process. So for the fact that I've said it on your podcast for the whole world to hear, but I really want, if we can rescue one baby through my testimony, I really want that. But I was still, afraid, but it's like, I can't be afraid of this. This is my life. And this is what Christ saved me from. And if anything, it just exalts how good and kind and gracious he is and how far the atonement reaches, even in just an individual's life, So,
Absolutely. That's why I wanted to make that point about the courageous thing, because we tend to like say that about people who are willing to talk about really difficult things. We tend to say, oh, they're just way more brave than I am. And I'm like, I don't think that it actually has anything to do with being brave. I'm sure that the person is just as terrified as anybody else would be whenever they're discussing difficult stuff, but it's for the love of God and for the love of lost people all over the world. And in your case, also for the love of these babies. And so I'm so thankful that you did talk about that. And I just know it's important that we make that distinction, because there are women out there that would probably just want to say this to someone, but not be able to. And they might look at you and say, well, you know what, if I was like her, then I could do it. But no, it's really just scary. And it's going to be scary, but you can. Well, it's just like sharing the gospel with anybody. I have people tell me, well, I wish I could be bold like you. And I'm like, I'm not bold. I'm terrified. I mean, I'm literally having to ask God for forgiveness every time because of the fear of man that I have whenever I go to share the gospel with somebody or hand a gospel tract out, which I'll be glad when the quarantine stuff is over so we can get back to working on those kind of things. But it's not a boldness. It's the strength of God in us, in his Holy Spirit. And then just in our weakness, leaning on his strength, and then loving God enough, because it is so glorifying to God for you to sit here and say, this was who I was. That person died. God raised me up, and now I'm a new person. I have new desires and new hope and new love. And it's so much that I'm so excited for people to get to hear this, because it really is glorifying to God. And hopefully from this point, people will be able to see then that not only were you forgiven, not only did God redeem your life, but you have a husband and a family and a ministry now. And so why don't you walk us through a little bit of how did you end up with this life that you now have? What was the path that God used from that point where you're saved? Now you have your boyfriend, which was really cute when you said boyfriend, and then now my future husband. That's really fun. So walk us through that. Walk us through how you ended up
here. And just one last thing on the abortion front was with all of the difficulties that I went through as a single mom, the abortion was far harder.
Yeah.
Far harder than raising a child and all of the difficulties that came with that, because there's a whole bunch of matters that happen with that. It was far harder to have the abortion than to raise a child. And you look at him and he's just the sweetest boy. So that's what I have to say about that. So after I got saved, I was, Lord, put me in, coach. I am ready to go. And, generally you're going to Africa or something.
Right.
And I just so badly wanted to be used by God, and was just serving in my church at the time. Just anything I could find, I would throw myself into. The first time I saw my husband was actually at his baptism. And I was like, that is the kind of man I want to marry.
Oh.
And because he just had this zeal and passion for the Lord. And he comes from a pretty awful testimony too. So we can understand each other. And so I just thought, oh man, this guy really loves the Lord. And I never met him until a couple months later. We were in a pretty big church at the time. And he actually was at a leadership summit at our church. So get this. So Bill Hybels, Rick Warren, the leadership summit. Have you ever heard of those?
Yep.
He feels the call into ministry so first he gets saved in Alpha and then he gets called into ministry. So God really can use anything. Because those are not ideal.
Right.
So he takes some seminary classes from a school in Toronto where we lived. And then we met, and we were introduced to, I think we were listening to at the time, James MacDonald's ministry, Walk in the Word. And that really got us fired up about sola scriptura and, the word alone and just feasting on the word. But he was very topical in nature. And I feel like we kind of grew past his ministry and we're kind of like, what do we do now? He's just not feeding us enough. And that's when a friend's dad introduced us to John MacArthur's ministry. And so the first sermon series I ever heard was on the doctrines of grace. And I'm looking at my life and he's just so word focused. So, this is what God's word says. Okay, this is what I believe. And, even my own experience was lining up with that, there's no way I could have seen who God was with the darkness that I was in. Right.
Right.
So we just started devouring MacArthur's ministry, and they hadn't opened the vault at that time. So you couldn't just go online and listen to his stuff. Computers weren't really big back then.
I didn't know
so
there
you
was a
have to
vault.
order his CDs you had to pay for them, I think. And in 2008, when we were at the seminary, they opened the vault so that all of his teaching was available for free.
I bet that was overwhelming.
We would have to order CDs from Grace TV. Yeah. Or you just ordered your life around when he was on the radio. And so, that's where just the seriousness of expository preaching came into our life, and was just so thankful for his ministry. And then my cousin, who is now at a church in Ontario, he actually went to TMS in 2006, the Master's Seminary. So he kind of paved the way a little bit for us. And then we went down in 2007. And we just wanted to be used by the Lord. Obviously, James is my husband. He felt the call to ministry, he wanted to preach the word. And we were just at that time really willing to go anywhere, but had a heart for Canada because it's so spiritually dry up here. So that's really what just set the trajectory for us. We're at seminary. And then as soon as he graduated, the church here in Edmonton, Grace Life Church of Edmonton, was actually called Grace Reformed Baptist Church at the time, saw him at a shepherd's conference and asked if he would come and candidate, which was exactly 10 years ago. Like we were here 10 years ago candidating, and we've
Happy
been
anniversary.
here ever since. Thank you. Yeah, it's been some of the hardest years of my life, but the most amazing years of my life. I really wouldn't want to be doing anything else than be serving this church. They are such a special group of people who just love the Lord. So yes, I understand that not every pastor and his wife get to experience what we've experienced in ministry. And it's so kind of the Lord. But we love it. We really do love it here.
Wow, that is great. How did you, so you're TMS. I mean, I gotta say, like, if you're gonna go to a seminary, there's a couple that are like top notch, but then you got like the tippy top tier, and that's TMS. I'm just like always, anytime somebody is like, I was thinking about going to seminary, I'm like, oh, so how are you gonna get to TMS then? Because I mean, I'm sure we could fund your bus ride if you need a bus ride. Just kidding. I know there's other great seminaries, but I'm so excited about the fact I didn't know there was a vault, because I have been like devouring on YouTube. TMS releases their classes, and you can follow along with them. And I've literally gone through their church history series, their lecture series. There's like 27 lectures. I've gone through them like 8 times now. I mean, I can't stop going back through and listening to them, but they have that available and it's totally free. And so, I mean, what a blessing that the whole organization is. I mean, when I was talking to Phil Johnson the other day about like what he's doing, how he edits books, and he's having to do all this stuff in the background, like there's so much effort that goes into those kind of ministries that we really should be praying for them and more thankful for all their hard work, because it's such a blessing, and they're spitting out wonderful pastors and pastor wives like you. So when you're over there, you're starting this church, and your husband is a pastor, now you're a pastor's wife. How did you decide that you wanted to work the women's ministry in a more God-centered way? What was that process like for you?
Sure. It's funny when you asked in the email, how did I become the women's ministry director? I said to James, I said, how did I get here? Kind of, because it happened a little more organically. I never had a desire to be the women's ministry director. But really what it was for me was at Grace Community Church, their women's ministry is called Every Woman's Grace. And our ministry is modeled after that ministry. But that ministry had such an impact on my life, because they just took you through the Bible, and they had older women who, are being generationally taught. They've been sitting under MacArthur's preaching for, at that time, 40 years. And their children are grown, and they have grandchildren. And so just really faithful women who are teaching you how to love your husband, how to love your children, how to glorify God, how to know him, how to really just study the word. And that ministry for me really just instilled the disciplines of the Christian life in me. So it had such an impact on my life. I knew that wherever we ended up, that it had to be there in some form. I didn't have to be the person, but I saw, for lack of a better word, the vision of it, because I had seen it run and function so well at their church. Sure. So the church, when we came here, it was about 5 years old, so still a little bit of a church plant, and they weren't quite ready for a women's ministry yet. So for about 3 years, I just prayed that the Lord would let us have a ministry that was really focused upon the Word of God and knowing him, because the primary vocation of a believer is that we would know him and we would understand him. And so for those 3 years, I just faithfully prayed, poured into the women around me. I did Bible studies, and we had a women's committee kind of happening that I was on for like events and stuff like that, and serving the church. But when it came to an actual teaching ministry, that wasn't there. So when the time came, it's hard because I don't want to let my own lips praise me, but I think I was the most logical person.
Sure, yeah, no, that makes sense.
Just because, I had been pouring into the women of Grace Life and discipling them. So it just, and my husband is the elder over the ministry, though he does tell me that I'm not there because he is the elder, but it's my giftedness. So he's very kind that way.
Yeah. That's like the most romantic thing a pastor can say to his wife. That's so sweet.
He's very encouraging, and I think he's the most wonderful man alive. But yeah, so that's kind of how that really came about. But looking at our women's ministry, the principle of the word being there was there, but we had to kind of massage it in a way that was going to really fit with our women.
Sure.
So that's kind of how I got there.
Yeah. I love that though, how it happened all organically. Sometimes if we force things, it can actually make it a little bit more difficult. But your women's ministry and how you're detailing it is really, really helpful. So important. We do have instruction in the Bible for how women should be teaching younger women. And I was really excited to get to ask Amy Spreeman and Michelle Leslie once about this, because I had a question posed to me by a listener. What if I'm a young believer, but I'm an older woman, and I don't have an older woman that has been in the faith for a long time? Can a younger woman that's been in the faith for a long time pour into me? So it was like a backwards ordeal, right? So she didn't have a woman that was her age, but there were younger women than her that had been in the faith for a long time. And so I just wanted to pose that question to you too, really quickly. If you had this situation where, let's say, by the grace of God, a 70-year-old woman was brought to faith. And now you have a new believer, but she's older than maybe a lot of the women in your group. Would you be comfortable picking a younger woman to teach her, as long as that younger woman had been in the faith for quite a long time? And have you had to deal with these kind of things, or is that something that's really random?
No, actually, that is really common for this generation, and it's actually really sad. I think my generation really is, I don't know if it's, if you draw it back, it all comes back to, in the 60s, 70s, men abandoning their pulpits in expository preaching, and the feminist movement taking off there, where you have a few older people that are getting saved, but for the most part, the church, except for you have MacArthur's ministry, which just is an anomaly, you have a lot of gray-haired people there. But there isn't a ton of older people, and at least in Canada, where they have for decades walked with the Lord. There are some there. But yeah, we're seeing older people get saved in our ministry. And I think it's sometimes, when I look at even the role that I'm in, ideally you'd like to have an older woman in that role. But I think, can she teach her? I think she can share with her what she's learned. I mean, if you're gathering, I have older women who definitely, older aged women who will come to me and ask me questions and advice. And I just want to be faithful with that. I think that's okay. And I think that the tide might turn a little bit with my generation.
Sure.
And because there seemed to be a reformation happening in the early 2000s of people my age getting saved. And, I look at the young girls in our church and I think, man, I never want to leave them without that Titus.2 woman, without that older woman that has, is reverent in her behavior. She fears God. She's serious about the word. She's serious about holiness, and just make sure that we're pouring into them. But I don't think a lot of churches, it's an ideal situation like MacArthur's church.
Right.
So
that makes sense.
I mean,
I think that's going to be helpful too. We wouldn't want them to not ask for help just because of the age differentiation. But while you were explaining that, I was thinking, boy, what would it have been like at the very beginning, like the early church? Because they probably had a similar situation where there wasn't really the pattern that we would hope to see if each generation was being faithful. And like you were saying with the Titus ministry, if each generation was being faithful, we would want to see that. But in the early church, they wouldn't have had that either. So I guess we do have at least some. And of course, there was times throughout church history where things were so messed up that they probably didn't have that either. So at least we have some historical grounding for that. But hopefully that'll be helpful too for anyone listening that struggles with that. Because praise God that He's gracious to save us anytime in life that He saves us. It's such a blessing. But okay, so right at this point, I have a million questions, but I'm going to try to zoom down a little bit. Well, we have in churches today an issue that it's unfortunately even happening in Reformed churches, where even though the pastor is preaching solid, doctrinally sound, straight through scripture exegetically, the women's ministry might be doing like a Beth Moore thing. So, and I unfortunately have heard from people that, down the street, there's a Reformed church and I saw a sign that said, come to our women's ministry. We're doing a Beth Moore thing. And so it's apparently a problem in not just unsound churches, but also sound churches. So what advice would you have for women in churches if they're sitting there and they know that they're being invited to a non-biblically sound women's thing? How would you want them to approach their pastor, and what advice would you have for the leadership in women's ministries to make sure that these things aren't happening?
Yeah, well, first of all, you should not have a women's ministry that is not connected to your leadership. So the basis of our women's ministry is we are an extension of our pulpit ministry. And so you don't just have this separate entity of women working on their own. We are actually working to complement the men and the leadership in our church. And so we want to really work on, my job is to be the mediator between our leadership and our women. And so I'm bringing the heart of our elders to our women. And so I would just, it's such an interesting thing. So you have a ministry where they're doing Beth Moore. I would prayerfully ask for a meeting with that leadership. Share your heart on just the dangers, like have your information, have videos that you can go to about her, and approach the leadership. I would be going to the leadership and saying, hey, I really need your leadership on this. I really need your voice on this. I really need to hear your heart. These are the issues, I could do that job for you. So one of the things that my husband really appreciated about me was that I kind of knew what were the dangers out there. Right. And so he could, when people came to him, he could go, you know what, probably talk to my wife about that, because she'll have a good idea of the author and what they're saying and stuff. So that was a service that I rendered to my husband, to be able to be knowledgeable about what was facing women and the difficulties and the error. So I would just bring that to the leadership. Sure. And say, like, this is who this woman is. I kind of have a vision for women's ministry to be word-based. Can I work with you on that? And just really kind of put the ball back in the leadership's court, because that's their responsibility before the Lord. And I want to be really respectful of people's elders and pastors, but I think there's a way that you can do it that is super respectful, with showing just the dangers that are out there. Yeah.
I love what you said too about like making sure that you're telling them, hey, there's a service that I could render for you in this, because I think we struggle, especially in a smaller church. The pastor can't know every name out there, because he's focusing on his sermon and focusing on the word that he's going to be bringing to people. And so it's helpful to have the full body working together in that way. And sometimes we have women that just, they have that natural knack for studying each and every author to make sure, like, which one is biblical, which one is not biblical. Are they remaining biblical? Like, we have a phrase here on Tulips and Honey, are they Francis Channing us, or are they staying solid, So so like, I think that that's helpful for, if you're a woman out there that you're like, hey, you know what? I have this extra time and the desire to be to be focusing on this type of discernment, you can offer that service. And instead of assuming, you know what, they know and they just don't care, maybe assume that they don't know, they haven't heard. Because there are still people that say, hey, 10, 15 years ago, Beth Moore wasn't a problem. 10, 15 years ago, her sermons, or her not sermons, but her writing and stuff was sort of weak, but it wasn't unbiblical. They may not know at this point that, and John MacArthur is a great example for all of this. Whenever he said the go home thing, I thought it was so funny. One of my followers on Twitter, she posted that she had gone up to him the next day and was like, hey, you're like a selfie hero right now. And she was like, your memes are everywhere. And he was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. He doesn't get online to see those things. He didn't know. It's a meme. Yeah, exactly. He had no idea that he had created this huge thing on social media. But because he has a whole body of workers that are helping him understand different things like that and helping him run social media, it runs functionally. You couldn't tell that he wasn't social media equipped, because he's on all the social medias, but he has a team, So I think that's really helpful. Hopefully we can do it lovingly, like you said, respecting your elders, rather than going in with the heart that you are assuming the worst, assume the best, assume that they just haven't heard this information yet, because there's a lot of new people coming up. Sometimes people will ask me names and I'm like, I have never heard of this person. And I go and Google them and they have a massive following. I'm like, how are there so many false teachers right now? It's just becoming a thing where it's like this new generation is popping up of these false teachers. And there's a lady right now I had never heard of, and she's on there talking about like sneaky squid spirits and stuff. And she's got a huge following. And I'm like, how does she have a huge following? I thought it was a joke. I was like, she's got to be like Babylon Bee. Right? Like this has got to be a joke, but it's not. She's for real out there telling people, be careful for those sneaky squid spirits. And so it's a lot. It's a lot on our leaders to take in. And so it should be a blessing for anyone if they come in and do address those things. Very helpful to know that we need one another in those roles. So speaking of roles, you have a really exciting role coming up in a very exciting event. Brooke Bartz is putting on, for the first time ever, Open Hearts in a Closed World Conference. It's a free conference. It's going to be all online. We're going to get it on IGTV, YouTube, Facebook Live. It's going to be happening. And you're one of the speakers. I'm super excited to get to hear you talk. What is your topic going to be about? And what are your hopes for this whole conference?
Yeah. Okay. So my topic is sound doctrine. And I'm probably going to draw from a few passages. Even when you look at the Titus.2 woman, and that, there's three things about the Titus.2 woman that's in place. She's, when Paul tells Titus that keep speaking things which are fitting for sound doctrine, he's to keep talking about just a life that's lived out what they already know about the truth. And she's to be reverent. So she's supposed to have sound theology. She's supposed to have really good character, and she's supposed to be just, so three, let me count three. Okay. Sound in doctrine, her character, and her home life. Right.
Wow. Yeah.
And so those are really important aspects. And then, of course we live in that you're going to acquire teachers. They want their ears tickled, and they're going to acquire teachers for themselves, which are in accordance with their own lusts. And my hope for that is just that the Lord would use it to, we might not be able to put the fire out, but we might be able to rescue just a few from the fire.
Right.
And the importance of sound doctrine. God has created us to be in relationship with Him, to know Him. And it's so important that we know Him through His Word by His Spirit. And there's so much confusion out there, like you said, and there's probably multiple reasons for that, whether it's sound preaching has been abandoned. The feminist movement is taking over. Women are reading book studies. So that's a really big thing. You need to be in the Word of God. So that's the basis of our women's ministry, is that we drive women to be in the Word on a daily basis, so that they're studying the Word of God, so that they're gaining discernment. And so that's really my heart is to hopefully see women be serious about pursuing the Lord through his word. And I really believe we just have a super lazy generation of both men and women,
Right.
where they're not taking time to study the word and they're not taking time in prayer. They're making decisions based off what feels good or what sounds good because there's no deep root. And so I hope that that comes out in my session, but that's like the whole just point of our women's ministry is that we are training women to be sound in the word so that they are faithfully serving our local church, they're faithfully serving their homes, and they're faithfully serving the Great Commission. So I hope that that can get out there and just be able to encourage women to, like, we're in the hour where men want their ears tickled, women want their ears tickled, and we live in a generation of where women speakers are just self-help wrapped in a God-like bow. Yeah. And that is so unfortunate because it's a stealing of the glory of God. Sure. So even inconsistent with church history. Take Beth Moore, for example. I have women that I follow on social media. They'll post a Beth Moore quote, and then after they'll post a Spurgeon quote. And I'm thinking, do you have any idea what Spurgeon fought for in the downgrade controversy? Is pretty much everything she stands for.
Yep.
And so that I just want women to love Christ and to love his word and to be serious about sound doctrine, because if you don't have sound doctrine, you will not have sound living. And we're starting to see that just in the compromise of like things like that you would never ever think the church would compromise. She's compromising on, and it's very, very sad. But I think there's far more false teachers out there teaching than we're too afraid to say no, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I'm so looking forward to that. This is going to be a great conference. I can't wait to get to hear you speak and all the other speakers. It's really, really exciting. So listeners, make sure, I've already told you like a million times, I'm going to tell you again, make sure that you set aside time. It's going to start 9:30 Central Time. Hopefully you guys are better at time zones than I am. 9:30 Central Standard Time on July 13th all the way through July 17th. And we're going to have City of Light going to be doing worship for us. So make sure that you set that aside. We're super excited about that. Erin, I have to get to some silly questions because we've had a lot of serious stuff here. And so everybody knows that I can't end the show without some silliness because that's just what I do. That's why I have a blooper reel. I mean, I like to end things with some laughs. Hopefully.
Did you get all your questions in for women's ministry?
I don't know. I didn't. I definitely didn't. But I've kept you so long that I'm setting some of them aside, and maybe we can bring you back for another one. I have too many questions. It's a problem that I have. I'm glad for homeschooling because my daughter is like me, and it gives like an opportunity for us to just sit and throw questions at Google over and over again all day long. But it does cause problems for actually getting lessons done. So I have struggled with that. But before we get into anything silly, is there anything that we can be praying for you as you prepare for this, or anything going on in your life that my listeners could remember for you in prayer?
Yeah, obviously the conference. I'm still a little bit, how did I get here? Like, why did Brooke ask me to do this? So that, just really, and the women, please pray for the women that they would just see Christ exalted. And just that seriousness of being in the word and testing everything. So the conference, yes. And then we are actually going to be starting to write our own content as a women's ministry because we have been using Grace Community Church's content, which is really great content. But I have several women. I'm not the only teacher. We have several teachers in our women's ministry, and we're ready to take that next step to start developing content, not just for our church, but hopefully that it'll reach beyond our borders and really help women be serious about the word. And so we'd like to be able to bless just the church in that way, our church and the church at large. So definitely prayer for that as we start to think about writing our own content and
Absolutely.
Making that a reality.
That's pretty exciting. I'm really looking forward to that. That's going to be great. And if anybody needs to ask you questions or find you, you have a couple of different social media sites. So there's is Instagram a better place for people to send you messages?
Yeah, sure.
Instagram. Okay, because you have two, right? So there's your regular one, and then there's the ministry one.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. I'll make sure to link to both of those down below so you guys can get a hold of Erin, and also to follow her so that you can get the super cool stuff she's fixing to make. It'll be there, and you guys can follow her. So that'll be down in the show notes below if you guys want to get a hold of her and ask all of the many, many questions that I didn't get a chance to ask because I was too slow on the draw with all of this. I'm so sorry. I could seriously talk to you about this for hours. Okay, I do have just a couple of silly questions for you before I let you go. Just something to sort of really give our listeners an insight into your mind and how it works, and a little bit of fun stuff about you that's really going to give them a different taste from anything else that you might get on other interviews. So the first question that I have for you that's going to be a little bit silly is, if you could incorporate any superpower into your homeschooling, what superpower would you want to have for homeschooling? I know, right?
Knowledge, I guess.
Yes. Oh, that is a great answer. To have all the answers every time they ask questions. I wish that was a thing. That needs to be a thing. I love that. And you came up with it really, really quickly. Okay. One more silly question, and then I'll totally let you go. This will be it. And thank you so much, by the way, for all the time that you've given me today. I know that I'm taking you away from your sweet family. So last question, I promise. This one is going to be hopefully a little bit easier for you. If you could go anywhere in the world to share the gospel with the women, to really give a women's ministry anywhere in the entire world, what would be, just based on whatever standard you want? It could be pure selfishness because of weather or whatever you want to do. Where would you go anywhere in the world and get to talk to the women? Even time frames. You could go back in time if you want. I mean, this is all hypothetical. We can do whatever we want with this question.
Wow. There's such a lack, but I'm so boring. It would have to be here because, we're in a city of about 1.3 million people. Whoa. And our city is so corrupt, and we have a pretty big red light district here. We live in a country where abortion laws are pretty much, we don't have abortion laws. And even live abortions are a gray area. So, with a city of 1.3 million people and about a handful of gospel preaching churches, that is really, really sad. And I have women that just reach out to me from various churches, and it breaks my heart, just all across Canada, just reaching out like our women are reading garbage, or they're doing this. And so I'm so boring, but that's
not boring. That is epic. Are you kidding me? There's no wrong answer to the silly questions. And I love your heart in that, to hear that you would really just want to just continue to be working right there. We're going to be praying for you, for your country, really, and for your ministry. Sister, thank you so much for joining me, giving me so much of your time. Thank you for what you're doing and the example that you're giving. We can't wait to get a hold of some of that stuff that future projects that you might be putting out there. You're a blessing to all of us, and I can't wait to hear you in the conference. God bless you, sister. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your ministry and just your heart to want to educate women. So I'm thankful. I'm thankful for women who will stand up for the truth and do that in a God-honoring way, and just, with the complementary mentality. Yeah. So I appreciate what you're doing, and I look forward to all of the promos that you have coming up to the conference too. So thank you, Lauren.
Thank you, sister. God bless you. You have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, Humblebees, that's it for today. Don't forget to check out the Aquila and Priscilla Hour on Tuesdays, and on Saturdays we have Always Only. On Sundays we have Breath of Life with Pastor Edward. That's going to be his sermons throughout the week. They're going to be played on Sundays, so you don't want to miss that. And of course, Tulips and Honey on Monday. I'm so thankful that y'all are listening. Don't forget to check us out. We have a group on Facebook where we are gathering to really help one another grow in the grace and the knowledge of Christ. So you can find us there. Tulips and Honey Hub over on Facebook. And of course, all of my other stuff is in the corner somewhere over there. I don't know how to point to it. There. Aha, I did it. Over here. You can find me on all the different social media sites right there. There you go. And if you have any questions or are in need of prayer, please be sure to reach out to me. I love getting your questions. We have a mega list every Friday where I am coming to you live on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter. So if you want to send in questions for that, or you have pictures of like a beautiful newborn baby or anything exciting happening in your life, ministry that you'd like to share, shout outs that you'd like to have, that's the place to give it to me. Send all those messages to me, and I will make sure that they are on our live event on Fridays. And that's it for today, Humble Bees. God bless you guys. Bye.
Thanks for listening, Humble Bees. This is Tulips and Honey. Over and out.
I think that diamond still needs a little more polish.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm ready. Woo, get all the jiggles out. Gotta get prepared. Okay. All right, sorry. I'm good.
Oh no, here, I'll Google it for you.
I'm gonna mess something up. That shouldn't be a thing. That's got to be a part of the fall, right? Somebody said that if I don't tilt my camera right, the flowers look like a crown over my head.
I actually did notice that one time.
And now I'm super self-conscious. I'm like, I got to make sure that I'm not doing that.
That's okay. I've got like
You've got the world
Africa
on your shoulders. Okay, I
my water all over myself.
Did you? Did I miss that? Did that happen?
Yeah.
Bless your heart. There's too many people with the names, and I'm thinking, okay. 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 Whew, all right. Whew, I can do this. Okay. Sorry. All right. I'm good. I'm like, where's your church? I'll move to you. Don't forget to check out the other podcasters on our channel. We've got on Mondays, the Aquila and Priscilla Hour on, not Mondays, I'm on Monday. Wow, I just messed my own thing up. How is that even possible? I don't even know. Don't forget to check out the Inquilla. It's not even a thing.